It was only a few years ago, late 2004, that my colleagues Jeffrey Sachs and Pedro Sanchez had a bold idea. They said, let's not just think about these goals as global goals. Let's not just look at progress in countries, but let's actually think about a concept of letting and empowering people to achieve these goals in the places where they live around Africa. And that bold vision became the Millennium Villages. And just a couple of years later, we now have 500,000 people mobilizing to achieve the Millennium Development Goals in 10 countries, and a growing number. It's actually now over a dozen around Africa, with many other countries lined up saying they want to join too. And we actually have 500,000 people already living and breathing and achieving these Millennium Development Goals. This was seen as too hard, not going to work, impossible logistics, and it's happening. Frankly, the impossible is happening every day. These villages and these communities, with just a little bit of help, a little bit of fertilizer, a little bit of seed, some bed nets, more than 300,000 bed nets actually, in the course of one season, had their yields triple across the board. The African Green Revolution is happening in these communities. They saw malaria come down dramatically as the rains came and they could sleep under their bed nets. They saw the school meal programs start and enrollments jumped through the roof in many instances. Very, very practical steps were taken at a time where most would still be debating whether to act. For me, this is so instructive because I actually consider my job working on the Millennium Development Goals, the Millennium Villages, to be a little bit embarrassing, frankly. Because I spend my time focusing on the simplest possible things. You want to grow food and you don't have fertilizer? Why don't we help with some fertilizer? Your children are dying from malaria. Why don't we get a bed net or some anti-malaria medication into the hands of the people who need them? It's the simplest possible practical steps that are needed and that are happening. But my job becomes complicated because everyone gives 1,000 excuses why you can't do the simplest things. They won't use the fertilizer. We don't know if they'll use the bed net. How are we sure this is going to work? Shouldn't we analyze this for a couple of years more before we do anything practical? Are you certain it's going to work? The basic reality is that the practical steps of achieving these Millennium Development Goals are overwhelmingly straightforward. And they're happening in large scale in some of the toughest and most remote places around Africa. And these 500,000 people living in Millennium Villages are showing what it could look like for 500 million people living in extreme poverty. And that's the basic point of the program, is to show what success looks like. But as we get the sense of what programmatic success looks like, and as we fend off these excuses every day, it's too hard, we can't do it, we're not sure, should we really wait and see? I've become increasingly of the view that this is a question of what the practical leadership looks like, to put the basic tools in the hands of the people who need them on the ground. We've heard from some of the world's truly greatest leaders on this issue today already. We've been blessed. We've heard from former Secretary General Kofi Annan, Deputy Secretary General Asha Rose Magiro. She and her current Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, they're mobilizing their full effort. Ericsson is mobilizing its full effort. Ericsson isn't waiting to support the Millennium Development Goals, it's acting, and we're so grateful for the leadership. We have Malawi leading on the African Green Revolution. We have colleagues and communities across the continent leading to take the practical steps needed for these goals to be achieved. It's really up to the rest of us to take on our practical steps to ensure these goals are achieved too. I'm often asked, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Are these goals going to be achieved or not? What's going to happen in Africa? I've been asked this question for about 6 years. I actually used to have an answer which was, it's not about whether they will be achieved or not, it's whether we're going to take the right choices when the choices come. I actually would update that now. I don't think it's about choices anymore. I think it's about actions. It's about whether we're going to take the actions that are needed to put the fertilizer, the bed nets, the internet connectivity, the school meals, the clinics, the medicines in the hand of the people who need them. That's not just a question for us to wait on governments to answer, or corporations. Our governments need to act, and we have to hold them to account, and we will, and we're expecting them to deliver. But our congregations, our universities, our corporations, our communities, all of us need to act. We've heard the call to action today from the UN leadership. I think the time now is for us to together make sure the impossible, all the things that couldn't happen before but have already happened now, that the impossible keeps happening. And that's what will lead to these goals being achieved today and throughout this moment of truth in 2008, and frankly every day through to 2015. So let's spare no effort. But let's not just spare no effort, let's spare no action to get these practical tools in the hands of the people who are desperately wanting, mobilizing, and ready to act to achieve these Millennium Development Goals. Thank you.